Hi everyone, welcome to the third video on how to install a 2AR-FE 2.5 liter 4-cylinder engine into your Toyota MR2. Frankly, giving it the power that I think it should have left the Toyota factory with, and maybe a bit more. Today's video is going to be all about the chassis preparation. There's a couple minor modifications we got to do in here to get it ready, and the actual drivetrain install. So by the end of this video, the drivetrain will all be bolted in there. There'll be a bunch of little loose ends we still got to wrap up, which is why there's 2 more videos after this one, but it'll look a whole lot further along. One thing we won't be covering today is how to remove the engine from your Toyota MR2. There's plenty of guides out there, so I didn't see it necessary to add yet another one. All right, let's get in there and show you a couple things we got to do to the chassis. And now we're in the front right part of the engine bay. These are the only things that you're going to need to modify in order to fit this engine in here. First is the stud needs removed. Next is this area above, and I'll put this tape measure here so you can get an idea. You can pause it. And this area here needs to go in about 10 millimeters. It's just to give you clearance to be able to service the alternator in the future. Technically it will fit without touching that, but I would strongly recommend you do this. And the third thing, I'll have to put a picture insert because I made this giant cutout before I had the exact position of the engine figured out. You're only going to go about in the middle, and you're going to need to go in about 10 millimeters for the valve cover clearance. And that's it. That's everything you need to modify. So let's cover some things you need to do before putting the engine in. First part of the install is you're going to want a custom clutch line. It's going to be a lot easier to install it right now than later, though it's certainly doable later. From the end of this flange to the end of this over here, it's going to be 10.5 inches. There's room to go about an extra ½ inch if you want, but there's no reason to make it any longer than that. Next, we're going to need to make a fuel line. From end to end, this is 31.5 inches, and it's just using 5/16 quick connects with 5/16 to AN, and then the Earl's Vapor Guard hose with the double ear clamp. So these definitely can't come off. The heat shielding here is pretty mandatory given where this is sitting in the engine bay. On this side we'll also use that 5/16 quick connect, but the 5/16 quick connect actually stays stuck on the motor. I'll cover that when we're on the motor itself, but you can still remove the fuel line because you've got an AN fitting there. Next we want to install that fuel line. We really want to retain it in place because there's a lot of hot exhaust right around that same area. So to do that, I added some riv nuts here and here. The exact location is not particularly critical because your fuel line here actually has quite a bit of give. So 5/16 is 8 millimeters. So that just goes right on there and it clips on. And this retainer here is a really good idea. You want to get one that's got this secondary retainer. So go ahead and lock that in place. And we're just going to put the clamp over and the clamp over and screw it on. And now the fuel line is not going anywhere. We're just going to tuck it out of the way so it doesn't get in our way when we're installing the engine. Continuing right along in this area, next thing we've got is the engine computer. I sell these brackets. They get put on with 4 screws, and now is actually a really good time to install it. Now, it's going to go right here. In road cars, you'll have a relay box right here, and this bracket fits underneath the relay box, so you'll want to probably loosen this and get it underneath there. The third bolt hole up there just stays open for now. That's actually going to get attached to the mass airflow sensor bracket. So just leave it away. Next, we've got an optional part. This is a heat shield for the clutch line. It's something that I noticed while endurance racing after 9-10 hours of racing or so. The clutch fluid starts overheating, so it's really barely marginal, but In this case, this is just a steel shield, and it scoops up air from the bottom and flows it over the clutch line. It doesn't even cover the whole thing, but it's enough that it gets the job done. So we're going to go ahead and install that. And this is not a part that I sell, so you're going to have to make it yourself if you need it. Alternatively, you could probably just get away with some heat sleeving, just like this. But this is the repair that I did while I was at the track, and it's worked, so I'm keeping it. And as you can see, there's still some of the clutch line that's exposed, but the other thing is this part of the clutch line will also be covered by the coolant hose that goes right here. So it's really not going to get much radiated heat onto it. While we're here in this area, the frame side front motor mount needs to go on. And now we turn our attention back to the engine. Got to put an engine harness on it. Now, if you're looking carefully, you'll notice that this is not the engine harness that we just made. That's because this is for the race car that I'm putting things in, and that was before I had designed the body controller. So it uses just one of these plugs, and it uses a different pin out. So I really don't feel like rewiring the race car. But either way, the instructions are still valid. So let's just bolt this on. Don't forget the grounds that are on this side of the engine. And we're not using the air conditioning. You can trim this off, or you can just zip tie it out of the way. Next time I won't open this harness, I'll actually trim those off, but for now, zip ties. Finally, the oxygen sensor. Note that you're either going to have to get an oxygen sensor with a long lead, or you're going to have to make an extension, or you can just buy an oxygen sensor extension and be done with it. Having a little bit of heat sleeving down here is not a bad idea. It's completely excessive up here, but it's already on there, so I'm not going to remove it. And now the engine is... And now we've pushed the engine all the way up to the car. Now, there's something interesting here you'll note. The engine is sitting down on the legs of the engine hoist. This is the way that I really like to do it. The car is high enough that this will clear. So what we're actually going to do, we're just going to put a strap from here to hold the engine in position because it wants to rock forward, so we can loosen this strap, put the strap over this bar, and then detach the other one, then put all the straps together. So we'll do this in fast forward. And see, we didn't have to push or drag the engine across the floor. Much easier. And now, in preparation for lifting, we've repositioned the straps. You can see there's one on the back here. There's one that we're using that's right in the starter hole there. And the other one is wrapped around the mount, like you can see right there. And what that allows us to do, see we've got them all coming to one point, is we can move the engine around, we can tilt it forwards and backwards and side to side. Alright, let's bring it on up. Before you go up, you want to make sure you've got the right motor mount bolt and the left motor mount bolt. Now something to keep in mind, this right one here, the insert is mild steel and it's super easy to cross thread, so as much as it's hard to hand start this bolt, you really do want to hand start it over on this side, on the right side. This one, feel free to use a small hammer to tap it in if you need to, but you shouldn't need to. We're going to put the right side on first, and we're going to have to kind of angle and tilt, and you'll see. As you can see, we're resting on top of there, but we don't quite have it in. Just a brass punch. We can go and we can move the engine until it's at the right position. There you go. We're several turns in by hand. So now it's definitely not going to cross thread. And this side. And at this point we've got the left and right motor mount bolt in, so it seems that we want to put the front motor mount bolt in, but before we do that, it'll be a lot easier if we do this step first. So the thermostat adapter housing shipped with this coolant hose, shipped with two hoses, but this is one of the ones that shipped with. This one is silicone and the other one's rubber, but the reason this one is silicone is because this one's in a much hotter area. It goes between the thermostat housing and the body, which is right in the middle there. It's a really hard camera angle to show, so I don't think I'll be able to show it, but you're going to want to go in with just this hose underneath there for now, and the motor mount bolt, and cut this to length. You'll end up somewhere around 2 inches or so past this, and you'll cut this. Cut it to length, and then I also provided this heat sleeving. It's probably not necessary because there's coolant actually running through this, keeping it cool, but it only takes an extra second. You really should put this on because it is really close to the exhaust. And if you're racing the car, this is going to become absolutely mandatory because of how hot it gets in there. This is probably a hair too long, so you might have to cut it. This just cuts with regular scissors. And then to put the clamps on, since it is the other thing you're going to notice is the clamps are a little on the small side. That's because this hose is silicone and it doesn't compress as much, so you really should use a size smaller. It really, we'd want these to be about a ½ millimeter bigger, but since we don't control all of these things, this is what we've got to deal with. These do go on. They're just a little bit of a pain in the rear. Anyways, you're definitely going to need some of these ratcheting pliers. You know, they click and hold in place. Without these, you're just going to be struggling for a good long time to put them in there. So once you've got it cut to length, you've got the sleeving on top. You'll just connect it to both sides, and then it's time to put the front bolt in and tighten it up. So let me get to that. What usually works best when you're doing the install is just to have this thing pre-compressed on here. That's what the ratcheting lever is super nice for, and then just go install it. Let's take care of it. And congratulations, putting that hose in was the hardest part of this whole swap, so I apologize if there was some swearing there for you. Next, we gotta put the front motor mount bolt in. Now, that thing, because both sides are rubber mounted, it doesn't always align perfectly well, so take a screwdriver in there with you. You might have to kind of push it to one side or the other to get it to line up, but it won't take more than just a small screwdriver. So. And that's it for this third video. We've got the motor installed and a few other little things, of course, that were necessary to do at the right time. The next video is going to cover all of the plumbing and the shift linkage and all of that, and it should be out soon. So, see you guys in the next video.